Hi there, my name's Anne Hawkins, and this is another episode of the Business Insights series that we're recording for our Pro and Premium members. This is exclusive content for our paid members. And today I've got with me Emma James, who has got the most wonderful business name. She calls herself the Number Ninja, and Emma's going to introduce herself in a minute. What we're going to be talking about is the very basics of bookkeeping. It's one of those things that most small business owners get really frustrated about. You know, they start a business and then suddenly realise that there's all this stuff they've got to do that they didn't sign up for. So there are some really great tips to help to make life a lot easier around this. And that's our aim with this interview today, is to get out of Emma some of the things that we can all be doing that just make life easier. So hi Emma, how are you doing today?
Yeah, not bad. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Would you like to just introduce yourself and tell people who you are and how you got into doing all this number stuff?
Yeah, so I'm Emma, as Anne said before. I run the Number Ninja, which is definitely one of those names that seemed much better when you didn't have to tell people what it was. And I started up last year, and prior to that I was a finance manager for an international medical communications firm in Cambridge. So had been already working with numbers and accounts for about 3 years. And decided that what I really wanted to do was be able to take that knowledge and experience and apply it to smaller companies and also charities and social enterprises, which I work a lot with as well.
Okay, that's great. So lots and lots of background in the numbers game, I guess. Is it right to think that some people just get numbers and other people just don't? Are there two different types of personality?
I think possibly. So yeah, I guess numbers do come quite naturally to me. I mean, it doesn't necessarily flow that if you are an accountant or a bookkeeper that you're very good at maths, but because plenty aren't and plenty don't need to be. But I think it probably does help to have some sort of affinity, I guess, with numbers, and there probably are people who, I think more than anything, it's that numbers scare a lot of people. Not necessarily that they can't deal with them or can't look at them or use them, just the very idea of having to sit down and look at them is scary. And I guess I'm similar to that, but with words. I don't want to sit down and write a blog or write a book or anything. And it's not that I can't use words or I'm scared of them. It's just, yeah, I think I'm more comfortable with numbers. And I think there are people who are the other way around.
Yeah. I think especially in business where people are running their own business and the numbers are all about the money. And the money is, it's a measure of how successful they are, or when they might be going to run out of money. So there is an extra fear factor in there, isn't there?
Yeah, I think it's almost, if you look at the numbers, you will know what the situation is, and sometimes it's just more comfortable and easier to not know what that situation is.
Yeah. So one of the things that we want to do today is to make sure that people are comfortable looking at those numbers, because there's no doubt about it that in order to run a successful business, you have to know the numbers. You really do have to know those numbers, don't you?
Yeah.
A few of the most successful people I've ever interviewed about running businesses, they swear by that. They say that they have a cash flow chart, which can literally just be one sheet of paper, but they look at that every morning before they start doing anything else. And they always know exactly where they are in terms of what money's due in, what money's due out, much money's in the bank, what they've got to play with. All of that, it all helps to make decisions about the rest of the business and how things are run.
Yeah.
So when a business comes to you and says, right, I've got to the point where I don't want to be doing my own books, or well, no, let's go back a bit. At what point do people usually come to you? Is it when they start, or when they've got in a mess, or when they've got fed up, or what?
It seems to be a real mix. So I think recently I've had quite a few at the earlier stages. So not necessarily right at the beginning, so before they've started, but they've maybe done a bit of networking, they've put the feelers out, they've possibly done a little bit. They've been trading for a little while, but have quite quickly realised that keeping on top of things numbers-wise is not what they want to do. And I think at the beginning that it's probably, although you need to be careful about money going out and everything, it's probably quite a good idea to do it as early as possible, because the earlier you can just get rid, it's like anything, the earlier you can get rid of the things that you don't want to do or don't like doing, the more time and just headspace that you've got to actually generate the income and do what you want.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it's primarily earlier on. I don't get that many people coming to me later on in a bit of a mess. I don't know whether that's because I just haven't met those sorts of people, or whether unfortunately people get to that point and don't want, they're so far in the mess they can't see a way out.
Yeah.
Hopefully not, but yeah, I think more towards the start of things.
Yeah, okay. One of the things that we ought to look at early on in this conversation, I guess, is the difference between a bookkeeper and an accountant, because a lot of people say, oh, the first thing you need to do in a business is get an accountant. And I don't altogether agree with that. I think a lot of small businesses don't necessarily need a full-blown accountant, but the services of a bookkeeper can be absolutely invaluable. So just talk us through the difference.
Okay, so I guess it's very basic. Bookkeeping is recording ins and outs, so the income that you're bringing in and what you're sending out, so what you're spending, and recording all of those business transactions. It also includes things like invoicing, so actually getting money from clients, and chasing payments if your clients are a little bit late paying. And it normally includes payroll as well if you have staff. And accountancy tends to be more actually preparing the statutory accounts, so the statements that are submitted to Companies House, and the corporation tax returns for HMRC for limited companies, and anything to do with tax planning as well is normally accountancy. I think recently, in the last few years, there's been more of a blurring between those two lines, and I think what you will normally find that most bookkeepers now, particularly those who are using cloud software, so are a bit more, I guess, modern and tech savvy, a lot of us do things like self-assessment tax returns, VAT returns, and we're providing a bit more of the advice that you might have normally in the past gone to an accountant for.
Right.
So you touched on it before with cash flow. I help my clients with cash flow planning. So we have a forecast and we review that regularly. And some bookkeepers do that, but that would normally be a traditional accountancy job. But yeah, I think particularly nowadays, you don't necessarily need to go straight to an accountant, particularly if you're a sole trader. If you're a limited company, you would need an accountant to do your year-end accounts as a very minimum.
Yeah.
But I think the key thing is just to speak to someone for advice as soon as possible, whoever that is.
Yes, don't bury your head in the sand.
No.
Okay, so let's have this scenario with our fictional business owner. So they come to you and say, right, Emma, how can you help me? So where would you start with them? What would you set up to help them to deal with their bookkeeping?
Yeah. So I think if they were completely brand new, so if we just assume they didn't have anything to start with, looking at what type of business they are and how they get their income. So is that cash? So for example, if they're a retailer, then that's probably going to mainly be cash based. Are they invoicing clients? How are they doing that? Are they chasing late payments? Do they even know if payments are late? First off, how are they spending money? So for example, mainly service-based industries are not normally going to be spending that much out in cash. Mm. It's mainly going to be things like software costs, that sort of stuff, rather than cash going out all of the time.
Yeah.
And how are they recording those receipts? And the key thing I would say to anyone at any stage in business is to keep the receipts. If you don't have those, then you've just got no idea where your money's going. And no cash flow forecast is going to be able to tell you that if you don't have the information in the first place. Yes, I think just looking at that. So what is coming in, how it's coming in, and again, what is going out and how that's going out. Then looking at the bank to make sure that what they've said is coming in and going out are the only things that are flowing through the bank. Particularly if they haven't been keeping things separate. So they've got some personal stuff in there and business stuff. And it's really important to try and keep that clear as much as possible. You're laughing because you say this to everyone.
I just have this image in my head of someone with a carrier bag or a shoebox full of receipts and not knowing what they're for.
No.
You know, they go back maybe 12 months or something, and somebody says, "Well, you know, what did you spend, you know, £25 on?" And just not knowing, because it's too far. Yeah. So yes, keep your personal expenses separate from your business expenses. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I interrupted you.
What was I saying? So looking at that, and then from that you can start to build that cash flow forecast and looking to see where money what has happened to that money in the past, what the plans are for that money in the future, and keeping on top of that and just making sure that everything that is flowing in and out of the business is actually being recorded somewhere. Okay. I would normally suggest some sort of account software. So I personally use and recommend Xero, but there are lots of other different things out there. A spreadsheet is fine, and it's certainly better than not using anything. But with dedicated software, you get so many different reports and graphs and just helpful things like automatic invoice reminder emails, that it's not that much money per month. So the top one for Xero is about £25, £26 a month, which isn't a huge amount for what you get back out of it.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that I always try and emphasise, is that yes, there are some expenses involved in having a bookkeeper or keeping accounts properly, but what you get back from that is absolutely invaluable. As you said, the information that help you to run your business and to make good decisions about what's happening with the money, but also just the peace of mind of knowing that you're not going to get to the end of the year and find you owe a lot of tax, or you're not going to run out of money without any warning. So I think that kind of stuff it is worth paying a little bit of money for.
Yeah, and I was speaking to someone yesterday who's saying that the main thing that she likes about having me working with her isn't so much the time I save her bookkeeping, because that was only taking her about an hour a week. Maximum. It's the time I've saved her from her not having to worry about it. So she might spend half an hour a week doing it, but she was spending about 5 hours during that week putting it off, or about it and worrying about it. Yeah. And a few people have said that. So I think that relatively small expense it's not just the time that you're saving, it's the headspace and everything else. And as you say, the peace of mind of knowing it's going to be accurate.
So if someone wants to set up Xero but doesn't necessarily want to have a bookkeeper to run the day-to-day stuff, is that something that they can do on their own? Is it easy to set up and keep going?
Yeah, so Xero, and I'm sure other things like QuickBooks, have got fantastic videos to help people learn more about the software and learn how to use it as well. And their education team is fantastic, and they spend a lot of time and put a lot of effort into trying to make things really straightforward so that most people will be able to pick it up. Yeah. So what I normally suggest to people who don't want my services but want to know how to set up Xero is to have a look at the videos and also have a look at their business to see how they want to get information. Because with a lot of software, well, it's not just linked to accounts, but the information you'll get out is only going to be as good as what you put in there. So you need to make sure that you've thought about what you want to know. So, for example, if you want to be able to record and how much money you're spending on software throughout the year, then you are going to have that split out in some way in your account software, because otherwise you're not going to know. You could just dump everything into a category called expenses, but that's not going to be that much use later on when you look. So
that could apply for lots of different things. If people are using, sending out direct mail or something, how much they spend on postage or printing or networking or whatever.
So looking at videos, but thinking specifically about how that links in with your business as well and the information you want. And to be honest, what I would normally suggest to people is to have a short training session where we can set up Xero together, again, talking about how they're going to use it, how their business works, and then going through a few of the key tips and tricks that just as bookkeepers we learn through doing it. And then that's normally about 2-3 hours maybe, and then after that they normally feel much more confident to go off and do it, knowing that they could come back to ask for help or they've got those training videos. I think it's definitely possible for a business owner to set up and do themselves. That's partly how Xero created that software, was so that someone could just pick it up and start using it. But I think as with a lot of things, a little bit of training from someone who uses it all the time and is an expert in that area is always going to be helpful, even if you then just do the bookkeeping yourself afterwards. Okay,
that's really, really useful to know. So just touching back on the receipts that we mentioned earlier, do people have to keep physical copies of receipts, or is it okay now to have them stored in the cloud?
Yes, it's fine for them to be electronic. So HMRC said a while ago that all they want is the actual receipts. They just want owners to be keeping those, whether that's in hard copy or in the cloud. That is perfectly fine.
Right.
And
so does that mean that they have to be scanned to be stored?
Not necessarily. I suppose it depends on how strict you define scanned, but lots of software like Xero that I use, you can take a picture of the receipt with your phone and then upload that to the software. So photos or actual scans, anything like that, again, as long as you've got some sort of record of them. And if you were to ever be inspected by HMRC, to make sure that they can see what you've spent, where you've spent it, if you're VAT registered, that have you actually got the VAT receipts for these things. So I think they're just more concerned with you having those receipts than necessarily how you have them.
Okay, that's really good. So we've got some kind of discipline going on here now. We're encouraging people to keep good records, to have some kind of accounting software that will do lots of different things, like generate invoices and late payments and flash up all the things you need to be reminded of. So what's next? What comes after that?
I think it comes back to the discipline, I suppose, but checking in with things regularly. I think if you do a little bit and often, that's going to really help. And as you were saying before, looking at that cash flow really regularly, certainly weekly. I mean, I look at mine every day, and sometimes throughout the day as well, just to see how things are going. But yeah, I'd say depending on your business and how much work you've got on, I guess, and how much money you're spending out, looking at least weekly at that cash flow and updating it, and using that rather than profit or bank balance to make any decisions. So if you're looking to rent a bigger office or take on staff, or maybe develop a new product or something like that, not making any decisions until you've looked at the cash flow. Profit, you can be completely profitable and have no money. So don't look at that. And obviously things like bank balances are only a snapshot at that time. Your bank balance may well be, say, £20,000 today, but if you've got a payment to a supplier of 24,000 tomorrow, that's not going to help you. You don't actually have that money. That's a bit of a problem. Yes, I think having that discipline of just regularly recording things, it's unfortunately not something that you can just do once or even twice throughout the year and then that will carry you on for the next year. It is regular, and just making sure that you've got all of your receipts. If you're doing your own bookkeeping, checking those against your bank statement. So checking the bank statement regularly. Again, maybe ideally weekly, but most people will do it monthly. And just checking that there aren't any items on there that you don't know about or that you don't have receipts for. Because if you pick something up that you don't have a receipt for, a month down the line, you can normally find it. If you do it 14 months down the line, you haven't got a chance.
I can hear business owners all over the place just going, if it's not your thing, it can just seem so tedious, can't it? So no wonder that, thank goodness there are people like you around who can say, just let me get on with it. And so in that case, how much control do people have if they've handed, because you do hear horror stories of people handing over to a financial director or an accountant or something, and then discovering that they have actually run out of money and nobody said anything to them, or that they're just not being profitable. So if you're working for someone, what's the reporting process there?
So I have different kind of packages that people sign up to, but normally at least quarterly we would have like a call or a meeting to go through performance. But always, as soon as, because I am looking at things regularly for people, as soon as I see something that doesn't look quite right, or say sales are starting to go down, or they're spending a little bit more than I'm comfortable with for the money that's coming in, then I would always flag that up with them.
That's great.
Immediately, even if that was outside of the normal reporting thing, just a quick email or something to say, well, you've spent £4,000 last month and you've only brought in £50. Like, what's going on? So even if everything's fine, then just having that flagged is quite important, because I know some people I've spoken to, when I flagged something up, they just weren't aware that they've spent a bit more that month. It's because you don't necessarily see the spending as a whole. You'll spend like 200 here, 200 there, and then all of a sudden that adds up. And because for whatever reason they haven't wanted to look at the numbers, that they're just not aware. So I think when you're starting that relationship with, be it with a bookkeeper, accountant, financial director, making sure that you are just keeping in touch with them. Ideally, they would be proactive and contact you, say, every month or every quarter. But sometimes that's not particularly realistic, particularly if it's an accountant who your relationship with them is only to do your annual accounts at the end of the year. So they probably don't look at anything.
It's a historical thing, isn't it? And
Yes, I think just keeping that communication open.
Okay, great. So we've got people set up and a bit of discipline, as you say, and if they don't want to do it themselves, there are people like you who will do it for them, and now we know what to expect, that it's not just an end of year snapshot of how the business did, but it's an ongoing relationship that helps to improve the business day by day. Is there anything else that you think people really ought to know about looking after the numbers?
And I think probably the key thing is not to be scared of them. And as I know you were saying before, that it is linked to how well the business is doing. And sometimes, particularly if the last few months haven't been that great, it is really tempting to just ignore them and hope everything will just go away and everything will be fine.
Yeah.
But the earlier you look at them and know what the problems are, the quicker you can sort them out.
Yeah.
And if you have your cash flow as well and your cash flow forecast, it's not necessarily a problem if you're spending more money than you're bringing in, as long as you're only doing that for 1 or 2 months. If you're doing it across the year, that is a huge issue. But if it goes down 1 month, then you look at that, and because you've got your forecast, you know that you've already got projects in place for the next 3 months, which will be fine. And yeah, I think not to be tempted to just ignore things.
Yeah.
And even if you've outsourced the work to a bookkeeper, that's not an excuse to just not look at anything.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, it's working with that person to regularly review things.
Yeah,
as well.
And as you say, once you've got used to looking at what's going out and what's coming in, it really does help you to know whether to chase the money that's owed to you or go out and chase some more business. To make sure that the funnel keeps on filling up.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great. Okay. Any changes coming up in bookkeeping or accountancy practices that people need to know about? We keep hearing all this stuff about quarterly tax returns and all this kind of stuff.
Yes. So yeah, we do have Making Tax Digital that is coming in, who knows when, at some point. It was supposed to be next year, but yeah, I think the timelines are still slightly up in the air with Brexit and everything else. And that will be quarterly returns.
Yeah.
To start with, it is just supposed to be quarterly reporting, so not quarterly payments, but just letting HMRC know the information every quarter.
Yeah.
But obviously it wouldn't be too surprising if after a year or two of that, it then became quarterly payments and everything else. And that is one of the reasons I would advise people to move away from spreadsheets sooner rather than later, because the way that the returns will work, it won't be paper returns. It will be links between software and HMRC. And what they were speaking about before the general election was they were going to let people use spreadsheets to do that, but there's very little information about what that's actually going to look like and what information what like columns and headings you'll need in the spreadsheet. Whereas software companies like Xero, QuickBooks, Free Agent, they're all working with HMRC. So if HMRC suddenly decided they wanted something a bit crazy in the return, the software companies are already building that in, or would be able to build that in quite quickly, whereas that's just not something that you're going to be aware of with that spreadsheet. But yeah, I think Making Tax Digital is probably the biggest one. And I guess next year for limited companies is the reduction in the dividend allowance. So at the moment you can take £5,000 out in dividends tax-free, whereas next year that's dropping down to £2,000, which is quite a big difference. So just for people to be aware of that. But yeah, I think they're probably the main ones at the moment.
Okay, great. Okay, so any last words of wisdom that you'd like to leave us with, other than get a bookkeeper?
Yeah, get a bookkeeper. Keep the receipts, please. Keep the receipts and know what your cash flow is. Two main things that I would tell anyone.
Okay, that's very, very heartfelt. Emma, that's been really, really useful. Lots of great tips there, and hopefully we will help people to get over this, any reluctance that they have to look at the numbers. It is such a big part of running a business, but one that, as I said, most people don't sign up for when they decide that they're going to start a business. So, as you said, the sooner they get to grips with it and get some kind of system in place, the easier it is, especially these days where systems talk to each other and things get linked together, and it just makes life a lot easier generally, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, thank you very much for your time and all your wisdom and patience. We'll put Emma's details on the website so that if anybody wants to get in touch with her, they can. And if you've got any odd questions, just ad hoc stuff, you can always contact Emma through our Facebook group. So once again, thanks very much, Emma. I'm sure we'll come back and talk to you again about different aspects of bookkeeping and how to help people really get to grips with the basics of what they need to know about the numbers in their business. But for now, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.